The first sign was the hiss of escaping gas. Deep below the surface of the Atlantic Ocean, Soviet submarine K-219 was on routine patrol, if there was such a thing, for a ballistic missile sub shadowing the U.S. eastern seaboard. The crew, 120 strong, had been at sea for weeks. The K-219 was old, barely held together by rust and repainting, a relic of the Cold War still forced into service. And on this October morning in 1986, something was very wrong. A gas seal in missile tube 6 had failed. Steam and pressure hissed into the compartment. Then, a low thud shook the sub. The metal groaned. And then, fire. A violent explosion tore through the missile bay, throwing sailors to the floor, blasting open the launch tube and flooding the sub with seawater. Radiation alarms blared. The men on board barely had time to respond before the sub began sinking, nose first, toward the dark, freezing depths of the North Atlantic. The K-219 was a hotel-class nuclear submarine armed with 16 ballistic missiles and 2 nuclear reactors. It wasn't new. It wasn't even fully seaworthy by American standards. But in the Soviet Navy, serviceable meant keep it running. The K-219 had suffered similar problems before. Just 4 years earlier, another missile tube had leaked and nearly killed the boat. But repairs had been quick and budgets tighter. So they sent her back out. On October 3, 1986, while cruising about 600 miles northeast of Bermuda, the seal on missile tube 6 failed. Seawater rushed into the tube and reacted with the remnants of solid fuel from the missile. The result was a chemical explosion inside the pressure hull. It blew the outer hatch clean off and ruptured the inner doors of the launch compartment. The explosion ripped open part of the missile bay and flooded the compartment with water. Worse, it compromised the integrity of the missile fuel. Highly toxic, hypergolic chemicals began to leak. Smoke filled the air. The crew rushed to seal off the compartment, but it was already too late. The submarine had lost buoyancy. She began to sink. The sub was now descending below its safe operating depth. The captain, Igor Britanov, faced a nightmare scenario: a flooded missile compartment, a leaking nuclear reactor, radioactive contamination, and the risk of total implosion if they couldn't stabilize depth. Miraculously, they managed to surface the sub. The men on board worked desperately, venting compartments, sealing bulkheads, and trying to restart systems manually. But the reactor was unstable, and one of the crew had already succumbed to toxic smoke while trying to shut the watertight doors. His name was Seaman Sergei Preminin. He would not be the last to die. The reactor temperature continued to climb. The automatic systems had failed. Someone had to go into the radioactive core compartment, and manually insert the control rods to prevent a meltdown. Sergei Preminin, only 20 years old, volunteered. Wearing minimal protection, he crawled through the narrow reactor space as the heat and radiation began to rise. The manual rods had seized. He fought each one into place with brute strength, alone, sweating, coughing. He inserted them one by one until the reactor was finally shut down, but when he tried to return, the hatch had warped from the pressure. It wouldn't open. He banged, he shouted, but the other crewmen couldn't get it to budge. Sergei Preminin died alone, behind the sealed door, his actions saving the rest of the crew from certain death. Above, the Soviet Navy was scrambling. A support vessel was dispatched, along with orders that no help from foreign ships would be accepted, under no circumstances. This was Cold War protocol. But the K-219 was still drifting, badly damaged, radioactive, and filled with exhausted, shaken men. American forces had already detected the explosion. Satellites and sonar picked up the damaged submarine. A U.S. Navy vessel shadowed from a distance, watching and waiting. There were concerns the sub might scuttle itself, or worse, sink with nuclear weapons aboard. Both sides were tense. Back on board, the Soviets decided to abandon ship. Captain Britanov gave the order. One by one, the men climbed into lifeboats and inflatable rafts, bobbing in the cold Atlantic as the support ship approached. All but one sailor survived the evacuation. The sub was left adrift. Officially, the Soviets claimed the reactor had been shut down, the weapons secure. Unofficially, K-219 still had 16 ballistic missiles, each with multiple nuclear warheads, and the sub was still floating. On October 6th, 3 days after the explosion, K-219 sank. She slipped beneath the waves and fell nearly 3 miles to the ocean floor, resting at a depth of over 18,000 feet. The Soviets marked the site, then covered it in secrecy. The U.S. made no attempt to recover the warheads. The depth was too great, the risk too high. And so the wreck remains, along with its nuclear missiles, at the bottom of the sea, leaking radiation into the cold, dark waters off Bermuda. Years later, after the fall of the Soviet Union, documents and testimonies emerged that painted the full picture. The K-219 had been ordered to patrol even after signs of mechanical failure. The Navy had ignored earlier warnings, and when the disaster struck, political embarrassment outweighed safety. Captain Britanov was quietly discharged. He had disobeyed a direct order by surfacing and radioing for help, a violation of Cold War silence protocols. His punishment? Career ended, honor stripped. But he had saved his crew, and Sergei Preminin, the young man who crawled into the overheating reactor to shut it down, was posthumously awarded the title Hero of the Soviet Union. Even today, the true danger of what happened on K-219 is largely forgotten outside Russia. But somewhere in the depths of the Atlantic, the wreck still rests. A rusted tomb of pressure and radiation, a reminder of just how close the Cold War came to going hot. Thank you for listening to the Sunken Ledger. Subscribe for more true stories from the depths.